Listening is an act of love. That is something that is loving our neighbor, to care really about what his or her real concerns are. And even through that, I was able to pull out what I believe was the main heart issue. And I think it was the need for autonomy.
Hey friends, it's Abdu Murray coming to you with another segment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, which is a series of short videos where I am joined by a speaker and a writer who speaks on apologetics and evangelism regularly to talk about times when we coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently, either from the stage or in a one-on-one conversation or something we wrote or even a video we recorded. Because we make mistakes, and the point is to review those things so you can get better, so you don't make them again, or you learn from what you coulda, shoulda, or woulda done differently. And the reason is to encourage you, because oftentimes you might find yourself paralyzed to not get in the game because you're worried about having to think about, boy, I coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently. Well, people who spend a lot of time doing this also reflect on these things, and they get better the more they reflect. And that will be true for you too. Well, joining me today on this particular segment of Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda is my good friend Brandon Cleaver. Brandon is a speaker and an author. He writes for multiple publications, but he's written most notably for Our Daily Bread. You can see his stuff at Our Daily Bread if you get that, and you probably should. Also, he does everyday theology with the Woodside Bible Church, and it's a great way to take theology and make it an everyday application to your life. And actually, what does it mean for this deep stuff of the Christian faith to apply in an everyday way? Also, he has a master's in apologetics from Biola and a master of divinity from Moody Theological Seminary, which makes him more qualified to sit in these chairs than me. But I am honored to have him join us today on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda. So thanks, Brandon, for being a part of the segment. And let's hear a time when you coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently.
Well, thank you, brother. It's always good to be with you. And let me just affirm what you said at the beginning about.
That you're more qualified than me?
Well, no, okay. Absolutely not that. Absolutely. That was kind of you, but no, absolutely not. But I do want to affirm, what you were saying about how we make mistakes. And that's what I love about this very unique and novel program that you have here, is that I'm thinking back 15 years ago or so when I first started to really get into apologetics and evangelism, and what you said there actually described me. I had a fear of getting into it for some of the reasons that you mentioned. So something like this would have been of such use and such a blessing. So I'm so glad to be a part of this and glad that you're doing it. So.
Well, and the fact that you have a coulda, shoulda, woulda story means that you got over that fear.
Well, I have many shoulda, coulda, woulda stories. So.
Well, let's hear one.
Yes. So, so this one happened within the last year, and I will be as anonymous as possible with this one. But it was a conversation that lasted. It was probably one of the longer conversations dealing with spiritual things that I've ever had. Okay. It was about 3 hours long. So. Part of the reason why it was so long is because there were many different ideas espoused during it. Some of these ideas competing. I don't think the person who posited these different things actually thought of them as competing or contradictory.
Okay.
But part of it was me trying to figure out these things. So anyway, the three main things that I was able to understand that they were talking about was, number one, religious pluralism, the idea that all roads, sort of all pathways lead ultimately to the same God. Scientism, the idea that the hard sciences like astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, so on and so forth, provide the most genuine and most reliable truths about our universe and the things in it. And then and the third one was pantheistic monism, or the idea that we're all God, we're all everything is one, so on and so forth. Absolutely. So
I can see why you could see that's contradictory.
Yes. So all these, you have secular ideas, you have spiritual ideas, all sort of converging in this one conversation. So what I was trying to do is navigate all these different things. And on top of that, I'm reminded of Greg Kokel's book, Tactics, I read many years ago when I first started, and he talked about the different types of people that you'll encounter. And this person, I love them, but during this conversation was sort of what Greg would have described as a steamroller. Just the idea that I think this person had a lot on their heart, so they would go and go and go, and me trying to find good entry points into this conversation wasn't an easy thing.
Yeah.
But the thing that I should have done when I reflected back on it, I should have been more assertive, not aggressive, but assertive, and really focusing on one of those issues and really talking about how they felt about it, my thoughts on it, if it makes sense, all those, like really just drilling down.
You used an analogy,
yes,
when we were talking before about the kind of setting you were at. There's different. You need to get right, and I like the analogy because I'm a food guy, and it was a food analogy. So please, I think it's a great way to illustrate this.
Yes. Well, we're not only good friends, but we also share birthdays that I think are exactly a week apart. So a few years ago, we went to a buffet, very nice buffet, and celebrate our birthday with some close friends and colleagues and family. And this buffet, like all buffets inherently have all different types of dishes and foods and things like that. And this conversation was sort of like that. Yeah. It was all different types of ideas being espoused. But my point in that was not to sort of take a sample of each one of those, but to really focus on the main entree, the main issue. What is the heart issue of this person, and really focus in on that. But again, I should have been more assertive and focusing on that one thing.
And that you've already made the distinction pretty clear, but I think it bears repeating, is there's a difference between being assertive and being aggressive.
Right.
And being assertive is just asserting yourself in a particular situation where you can say, can you hold on just for a minute? If you don't mind my interrupting.
Yes.
Or I'd like to share or reflect something back to you or whatever. And aggressive would be interrupting them without permission or just going for it.
Right.
And I think you're pointing out a really good distinction here. Now, this is interesting because oftentimes we can be the opposite. We can be overly aggressive and then regret our being too aggressive.
Yes.
But there's plenty of times when we want to be good stewards of the time where we want to listen to somebody. And because you've talked about it, I've talked about it, how valuable it is to just be quiet, just listen. But there are times when if you don't cultivate the art of listening, you're not being assertive enough to where you never get to ask the right question or say something that would get the conversation moving down the field as opposed to going into all these different directions. And before you know it, you filled up the plate halfway through the buffet, realizing the thing you really wanted is over there. And now the plate's too full and you can't put it on as well. So I can think of, and by the way, I want to say something. I really appreciate the fact that you shared a recent story because one of the temptations we can have, especially as people who are people who speak for a living and write for a living, so we want to share the story about when we first became a Christian because then it's safe, to say I've learned my lesson since then. Reality is we're learning our lessons all the time, and we've had so many guests on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda who have been vulnerable like that.
Exactly.
So I appreciate that. I'm going to share really quick a story that happened as recently as last week when I had sort of an opposite situation. It was the same theme, but it was different. We only had an hour to speak.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't a wide-ranging ability to keep going and going and going. I would have loved that, but we only had an hour to speak. And so what I ended up doing with this person, and this person was a Muslim who had incredibly sophisticated philosophical questions on the nature of God and how that impacted the Trinity, which is my favorite topic to talk about. So I wanted to dive in right away and get to the main entree immediately. But I said, okay, wait, we're going to lay some groundwork here. What ended up happening was because the time was so short, I feel like both of us were sort of in this chess match kind of a conversation where we try to be efficient as possible with our time, but we're sort of setting it up so that we could, at the end of the thing, say, okay, I want to leave you with this. And while we were listening to each other, and I do think that we were listening to each other, I would say for my part is that I was trying to make sure I set up where we were going, which is not a bad thing. It's just, and it can be a very genuine thing, but it didn't make, I think, for the most efficient of conversations in the middle of it. So sometimes you can have the opposite as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that level of vulnerability, but also the fact that you needed to get to the main thing and just didn't spend the time, didn't take the effort to do that, or didn't not to take the effort, but didn't strategically get there. So yeah.
Yeah, and to your point about listening, I mean, listening is an act of love. That
Hmm.
is something that is loving our neighbor, to care really about what his or her real concerns are. And even through that, I was able to pull out what I believe was the main heart issue, and I think it was the need for autonomy. And I'm reminded of what you said actually in your book, Saving Truth. And for anyone watching, I promise you, Abdu did not pay me to say that. He had no idea I was going to say this. I actually
This is a surprise to me.
yes, yes, I just thought about it. But you said that when we're a law unto ourselves, then confusion is inevitable. And I think that's what made, again, this conversation so long, is that it was inherently confused. There were so many competing ideas. But if you don't mind,
Hmm.
we're good friends. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna buck the trend a little bit.
Okay.
And I know typically people give guests give a shoulda, a coulda, or a woulda.
Uh-huh.
I would love to give a shoulda, coulda, and a woulda, because there were so many things I learned
All
in this
right.
conversation.
All right. Well, deal. It's a deal.
Okay.
So that gives me a great reason to have you on for another segment. We're going to wrap this one up, ladies and gentlemen. But be sure to tune in because for the next one, because Brandon's going to share with us a coulda and a woulda, not just a shoulda, which is great because we'll learn a broader spectrum here. Friends, please do tune in for the next segment because what you're finding out, hopefully you're seeing through these segments, and I hope you watch more than one, is that while there is a science and a tactic to having good, meaningful, non-manipulative conversations, it's also an art. And the more you paint, the better your paintings become. And that's true for people who've been doing it for years or people who have just started out doing it. So join us for the next Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda, where Brandon Cleaver will share with us a couple of more aspects of this, and he'll give you the full course meal. He'll give you all the dishes in the buffet, not just the shoulda, but the coulda and the woulda.